Hey guys, let's talk about tonight's episode of The Flash. And today was part one of the crossover episode between The Flash and Arrow. And it was a good one. I really enjoyed it. I think that Oliver, Felicity, and Diggle showing up in Central City was a great addition for The Flash. And I think all the interactions between, the team at Stars Lab and Felicity and Diggle were great. When Diggle sees the Flash for the first time, or should I say Barry for the first time, his reaction is awesome. And I think it's a reaction that feels real. You know, Oliver's so used to seeing all these kinds of crazy people, and so is Diggle, but to see somebody that moves so quickly and to see Diggle's reaction was humorous and awesome to watch. So, of course, we started this episode off with our bad guy of the week, and that's Roy Bigelow. And he's basically someone, he's a metahuman, and he's able to, his eyes glow red, and he's able to turn people into these very violent, angry people. And he basically does this so that he can rob a bank and or he can get out of any type of situation that he's in. But when we see him at the beginning, he's robbing a bank, and he uses, and if he looks at somebody and his eyes glow red, then their eyes glow red, and they look at somebody and et cetera, et cetera. So he did it to create a distraction so he could go in, rob the bank, and then leave. So of course, Oliver shows up to help Barry when he's in a very sticky situation, and he decides to stick around to help Barry out with his case. And of course, Oliver, Diggle, and Felicity show up in Central City because they need to find out information on the man that they're looking for, which is the guy from last week's episode who had the boomerang that is like wielded like a knife. And so they want to find out more information about this man who's wielding this awesome piece of, I guess, armor or weapon, I should say. So, of course, there's a little bit of banter between Barry and Oliver, and Oliver doesn't really want to stay and help, and and Barry's like, oh, well, we all work together, and I'll help you out with your case, and you can help me out with mine, and then they finally agree, and it's just cute. And I love it when Barry whisks Felicity off of her feet and he takes her to Star's lab. It was really cute. Lots of really cute scenes between all of them. And again, I really do like the chemistry between Felicity and Barry. But I will say that I'm starting to develop my own liking now for Iris and Barry and Iris and the Flash. So in this week's episode, the Flash and Iris hit a bit of a bump in the road. Of course, Iris is his number one defender. She is constantly writing about him. She's excited anytime somebody posts a new picture about him. And there's a moment at the beginning where Barry kind of gets this look on his face because he's excited because it looks like he is causing a rift between Iris and Eddie. And because Eddie comes into the police station and wants to build a task force to try to get the Flash and bring him in because he thinks he's more of a harm for the city than he is a vigilante for the city. And of course, Iris completely disagrees with this. So when Barry sees that there's a little bit of a rift going between them, he tries to, poke a little bit more at it. And when he goes to see Felicity, what am I doing? When he goes to see Iris on the roof, his first question is, did you and Eddie break up? And she's like, no, he just doesn't believe that you're here to help the city, and I do. And he's all a little disappointed because he's hoping that he can split the two of them up for good. Not going to happen. And at least not now. So, we have a lot of things. There was a lot going on in this episode. So we basically had our bad guy in Roy Bigelow in this episode. And then we had the Oliver and his group trying to track down the man with the boomerang. We had Iris and Eddie fighting in this episode. We had Joe and Harrison convinced that Oliver is no good for Barry because they've heard of his reputation. They know he's killed a lot of people back in Starling City. They know that he is not a great influence on Barry, and they're trying to keep Barry away from Oliver. So that was a very interesting dynamic. And then, of course, we have Cisco and Caitlin back at Star's lab, who are, very excited that they now get to find out who the Arrow is, and then they're going to find out his identity at some point during this episode. So, there's a lot going on. And then, to top it all off, Barry ends up getting affected by Roy's powers, and he tries to stop him in this one scene, and he does the flash on his eyes, and now Barry turns into this not very nice person, but a great nemesis for Oliver in this episode. And I loved that fighting scene between the two of them. I thought it was great. So, of course, the scene before that is, Barry basically telling Oliver that he's jealous of him and that he wishes that he could be as fast as him and all this stuff. And he is just doing all these digs. And at first you're kind of like, whoa, Barry, you're getting a little big for your bridges here. But then obviously we realize that he's been affected by Roy's power. And every scene that he goes into after that, they just become increasingly more mean and evil. So next he bumps into his captain, and captain's asking him if he's tracked down this person yet, and he gets all mad, and he's in his face, and he's yelling at him, and then Joe steps in, and then he starts yelling at Joe, and then he sees Iris and Eddie walk off together, and so, of course, this is going to be what sets him off the most. And there's this scene where Iris and Eddie are in the car, and Eddie's, blathering on about why it's important that he builds this task force because he doesn't trust who the Flash is. And then next thing you know, Barry / the Flash is pulling Eddie out of the car. He's throwing him around on the road. He's beating him up. It's like craziness. And of course, Iris comes out and she sees this and she's begging him to stop. And he's like, "You don't know me. You think you know me." And da da da. And like so, Barry has lost it at this point, and he's just turned into very, very mean Flash. And this scares Iris. And then, of course, Oliver shows up in time and he shoots him with the arrow. Oh, the scene before when Oliver was training Barry was awesome too. And when he shot him in the back with the arrows, perfect. I mean, everything about the fighting scenes, the confrontations, everything, all the scenes with Barry and Oliver worked very well for me in this episode. And so to see Oliver show up there to try to protect Eddie from Barry was great. And then, of course, Iris and Eddie run off. And this is when the awesome fight scene happens between Oliver and Barry. And they're showing all these like crazy, like Barry spinning around Oliver shooting his arrow up into a building, going up, and then Barry like going up very fast and like cutting him down. Like so much happened in that fighting scene. It was so awesome. And then you're seeing like Oliver, like trying to get away from punches in slow motion, is kicking, and then Barry running around him and punching him, and then Felicity's like, "Get up!" Like, I mean, there was so much going on. And then you had Diggle back at the Stars Lab with Cisco. They're basically trying to bet on who they think is going to win this confrontation. I mean, it was fun. It was fun to watch. So I really enjoyed all of that. Unfortunately, I think Diggle didn't really do much in this episode. He was a little awestruck at the beginning, with what Barry could do, and I feel like, Diggle's just not being used to his fullest potential especially on Arrow. And again, he wasn't really used to his greatest potential in this episode either. Felicity did a lot, but of course, Felicity's Felicity, and they all love Felicity. So, I just want to see Diggle do a little bit more. So all of that went down, and then we had to basically try to end this fight scene between Barry and Oliver. Harrison and Joe show up with this truck, and they do this like crazy spin out, and they open up the doors, and all these flashing lights start going, because that's basically what they need to use to counteract the whatever's been affecting Barry. And this is how they ultimately stop him and bring him back to the Barry that we all know and love. So now Barry basically has to do a lot of apologizing. So he's got to apologize to Oliver because he was very mean to Oliver, and then they got into this huge fight, and Oliver's shooting arrows at Barry, and he's stabbing him in his leg. I mean, let's face it, Barry took some serious war wounds in this fight. And I love how he says this is going to be a tough hangover, like, for me, because, yeah, like, he wasn't himself and he, got taken out basically in this episode. So that was a lot of fun to watch. So, of course, now we have Eddie going one last time to his captain and saying, we need to get this task force together, and it's now approved. So, here we go. We've got a group of people that are now going to be going after Barry because they don't feel that he is out for the greater good of the city. And Eddie is going to be heading up that task force. And, of course, Joe doesn't want anything to do with it because he knows who Barry really is. And so when now it's time for him to apologize to Iris. They go up to the roof, and of course, Iris just wants nothing to do with him. He's apologizing. She's like, I've been defending you, when my dad, when Eddie, when everybody's been, and even Barry's been telling me to stay away from you, I wouldn't, and because I thought you were good, and now I'm going to start listening to them. And she basically walks away, and he's like, I'm sorry, like. And again, we all know that these types of people don't get their happy endings, like Oliver said. And that was a very interesting scene that he walks into at the her diner or her cafe, and she basically goes to the counter with Felicity to get something to drink, and then Oliver's like, yeah, I need to talk to you. And he looks over at Iris. He's like, yeah, you need to end that because it's not going to end well for you. We don't get happily ever after. And of course, he's looking at Felicity when he says this. And Barry's just looking very sad and somber. And it's just like, I don't know what they're going to do with these two guys because obviously they're going to try to keep them apart as long as they can. I still am not loving Eddie. I'm sorry. It's just not working for me. I just want him to be a dud. But maybe now that he's going to be on this task force, he'll get a better personality. I don't know. But of course, love Joe, love everything about Joe in this episode once again. And the cross episode really, really worked for me. And again, I mean, I'm even starting to like Cisco a little bit more because all that stuff with him was great. And of course, Felicity being there, and that first scene when he whisks her in and then all of a sudden her clothes is on fire and she takes it off and she's standing there in a bra. It's like, of course, Felicity has to be in some embarrassing moment on the show. So again, now Oliver's identity has been revealed to Cisco, Harrison, and Caitlin. So the jig is up for him. So he has to hope that these people will not reveal his secret. And I like that when he walks away, Barry's like, there's really something weird about that guy, Harrison. So once again, Harrison is just that oddball that we can't quite figure out, but we know he's up to no good. We know he wants to protect Barry at all costs, but we don't really know everything about him. Another really funny scene was when Cisco was studying the boomerang, and then all of a sudden you see Caitlin running, screaming in the office, and the boomerang's going all over the place, and he's like, that was my fault, my bad. I take the blame for that. So again, I think Cisco's character is really working on me now. You're getting his quirkiness, you're getting his sense of humor, and I like that. And he throws out a couple of one-liners in there that are always pretty funny. So I think that he's really starting to grow on me. So of course they end up catching Roy, and they've locked him up in one of their prison case, their little lockup cell there. And now we'll probably see him again at some point. But for now, he's held hostage at Star's lab. So yeah, another solid episode of The Flash. Oh, and before I go, we also saw Caitlin looking longingly at the picture of her fiance, and we see a man standing under this bridge, and he's shaking, and he looks like he's got the shakes, and then all of a sudden he stands up, his hands start glow like they're on fire, and his head is like on fire, and he just opens up his arms like this, and then this big ball of flame goes up, and obviously that is Caitlin's dead, not so dead fiance. We knew he wasn't going to be gone for too long. So yes, it looks like he's going to be back, and I can't wait to see what happens there. All right, guys, that is it for me. I really enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you thought. I'm liking the dynamic. I think that we're starting to really flesh out a lot of these characters, which is good for me. Iris is starting to get a little bit more storylines here and there, which is good. Eddie's still a little bit rough around the edges for me, but all the other stuff is really working, and the crossover I thought was great. I cannot wait to see tomorrow's episode of Arrow and how they bring Barry and his team over to Starling City. I think it's going to be another great episode. All right, guys, that's it for me. Good night.